Between 1996 and 2002, there was a group called the Earth Liberation Front that still exists, but it was particularly active during that time. It, you know, more or less burned down a whole lot of buildings, right? That was basically the idea. It's not very complicated. Underground action that was actually striking against some of these companies and some of these government agencies in a place that they could feel it, in their pocketbooks and in their public reputations. And so this group of people went around and burnt down a lot of corporate headquarters, and they went down and burned down a lot of government buildings, a lot of vehicles and equipment owned by corporations and government agencies that were destroying the environment. And it got a lot of attention, if you can believe it. You cause $1 million in damage by setting fire to something, people seem to start to pay attention. They can ignore your petition, but they're not going to be able to ignore that. They may not like it, but they can't ignore it. So what I did with my friend Craig was that we formed this group called the Earth Liberation Front Press Office. We exercised this little known thing in our Constitution called freedom of speech. We thought that we would actually be able to say publicly that we supported this kind of thing and that more people needed to do this kind of thing if we were actually going to protect the environment, and that it would just be all nice. You know, that people would say, oh, I disagree with that, or I agree with that, and then they'd go on with their day, but it was actually a little bit more complicated than that. One thing led to another. More and more of these fires kept happening, and the group became designated as the FBI's #1 domestic terrorist priority. Hundreds of millions of dollars in damages accumulated, and we were raided by the FBI on 2 occasions. This exhibit is about the second time that we were raided on the FBI, April 5th of 2001. As you'll see here, being an activist is not all fun and games. So with that, I'm going to try to talk about some of this stuff. And I will start with this wall right here. When they raided us, they would take one of the actions that the Earth Liberation Front did and use it as the reason for the raid. The first time they raided us, it was an arson that cost $1 million against Boise Cascade, which is one of the biggest forest product companies. They took the forest and they turned it into products like toilet paper and copy paper and stuff like that. Well, this time, they used this action as the reason for the raid. And what had happened was, there was an activist, 2 activists actually, named Jeff and Craig. And back then, they didn't call it climate change, they called it global warming. And all the politicians seemed to think, or seemed to say at least, if not think, that it wasn't real, that it was a myth, a hoax of some kind. And so our government more or less viewed climate change, calling it global warming back in the 90s, as if it wasn't real and ignored the problem. And at the same time, all these companies, American car companies, were making these giant SUVs. It was a new trend. So they started making these huge vehicles that cost a lot of money, they were a status symbol, they made a lot of pollution, and they guzzled a lot of gas. And Jeff and Craig thought this isn't a good thing. As they were burning down this SUV, they were being watched by the local police detectives, and shortly afterwards they were arrested. Now all these arsons were happening, and nobody had been caught. So finally somebody was caught for, even though it was a small arson, $19,000, 1 truck, 1 SUV, it was still the first time that somebody was caught for one of these things. And they wanted to nail them. They wanted to really make an example out of how bad this was. What happens if you get caught doing this? So Jeff, they pinned him as the leader, so to speak, and sentenced him to 22 years in prison. You know, arson, you'd be lucky to get 7 years for an arson normally. 22 years is what you get, actually it's more than what you would get for raping or murdering somebody. So a lot of times. So that's a lot of time. And the idea, what the government had in its head, was that it was going to scare people away from doing this kind of thing. Well, the Earth Liberation Front didn't like that idea. They didn't want that idea to spread. So they went back to the exact same car dealership, and they burnt the whole thing down. The whole thing down. It was 35 SUVs. It was $1 million in damages. It essentially says that we need to stop climate change, but that we also need to stop sending people to prison for trying to protect our environment. It's pretty powerful stuff. There's also some background here on the action if you want to read about that. And these photographs are all of the action. As you can see, these SUVs are all totally destroyed. There's a lot of damage. So that was what they used as an excuse to come and raid our house the second time. Eugene is about 2 or so hours from Portland, and they figured it's close enough to get a judge to sign a search warrant to come and take our equipment away. So they came, and and they took our equipment away. If you look over here, you'll see some of the agents that day. This is our house that we were renting. This is my vehicle at the time, which is mentioned over there. I'll probably bring it up again in a minute. Here's some agents bringing paper files out the back of our house, which I've never gotten back. And here is a lot of the equipment that was released sitting in the back of an FBI SUV. Some of these things can be seen, well, if you look at this guy here, he's holding this printer. That's right back there on the table. And there's a number of other things in here. There's a hard drive that's out in the front. Fax machine, which is right there. That was the main fax machine that we used at the press office. This is how we contacted the media. Got literally hundreds of national news stories on these actions. And they came at 6 in the morning, and they had guns out, and they came in and they, handed the search warrant. And they said, you have a choice. You can either leave and not come back until we're done, and we're going to take several hours, or you can sit here on this couch and not move until we're done. I mean, it's our house, so I thought I'll sit on the couch. Craig, who I was running the press office with, who's featured here, was out delivering baked goods that morning. He had a small bakery. If you want to read something funny about that, you should read this piece right here from an ATF document. Pretty hilarious. They were talking about, they overheard us talking about cookies, and they thought we were talking about computer cookies. That they had we're actually talking about chocolate chip cookies, so you should check that out. It's pretty funny. So he was out delivering cookies, and he gets pulled over, and his car is raided. Then they take him to the bakery, and they raid the bakery. Meanwhile, I'm back at the house, and I'm getting raided here with 2 roommates, including Elaine, who's featured in this picture. So I sit there on the couch for a while, and I deal with them for a while, and I'm kind of watching them. A lot of weird stuff is happening. They're not telling me what, because I can't get off the couch. And then I realized that we had this press conference scheduled for that morning, because there was a case where somebody was being charged for tree spiking in Indiana, and we were going to do a press conference on it. So I said, you know what, I changed my mind, I want to leave. And they said, okay, you can get dressed. They had to watch me get dressed and search everything on me, and then let me go. And then I went to this press conference here, which is featured in the Associated Press photograph. I talked about what was going on in Indiana that day, but then at the end of it I said, and right now, on the other side of town, we are being raided by the FBI. And if anyone is interested from the media to come and see this thing happen live and in person, you can follow me. I was on my bicycle. They have live news feed vans with the big antenna that pops up out the top. So I'm riding, say, 15 miles an hour on my bicycle. There's 5 or 6 of these news feed vans behind me. It's quite a show. And so they showed up at the house, and that's how a lot of these pictures got taken. Here you can see is a cameraman for a local news station, and we're going to show some news footage here in a minute. The agents were not happy about getting their pictures taken. Some of them came out with bags and boxes over their heads trying to hide their identity. But it got us a lot of attention, and within just a couple days, all this state-of-the-art equipment was greatly improved upon by donations from the public who were supportive of us. That was a good thing. So I'm going to keep moving along. Let's go out to the other room. So here's the actual search warrant, and this is what a search warrant looks like if no one's ever seen it. They'll list the people who are being searched, they'll list the addresses of the buildings that are being searched, and then the vehicles that are being searched. Again, this is my vehicle, my home address at that time. They had the judge sign it on the 4th of April of 2001, and it was good for 10 days. So they had a 10-day window when they could do the raid, but they wasted absolutely no time. 6 a.m. on April 5th is when they did the raid. So they got the judge to sign it, and they mobilized their troops right away. One of the things that I find is interesting is what happened with the typewriters. Now, in the 1960s and 1970s, there were a lot of underground groups, right? And they were doing a lot of actions, and they were releasing a lot of communiques claiming responsibilities for their actions. And back then, they would use these kind of things to type up their communiques. But remember, this is the late 1990s. This raid happened in 2001. People were not typing up communiques on ancient typewriters anymore. They had computers, and they had anonymizers and remailers on the internet. I mean, it was nothing like it is now, but nonetheless, there were no ELF communiques typed up on a typewriter. This was not the 1960s, right? Nonetheless, the government must have had some kind of protocol where if you raid a radical group, you take the typewriter. And these agents that do the raid, some of them are the ones that were involved in the cases quite a bit, but other ones were just assigned to it that day. Maybe they're agents that just do raids all the time. Clearly, from some of the documents we got back from the ATF, some of these people had no idea what we were about or what they were even doing. They get briefed on the front porch before they kick the door in for a couple minutes about what they're doing, and that's all they know sometimes. So these agents took these typewriters. I had typewriters because I was a book art student at a college called the Oregon College of Art and Craft. And if you look at this relic, it's got a metal plate down here that says Oregon College of Art and Craft on it. I had this on loan from school for a project I was doing for school. I had these other ones I had collected, and this was my prized typewriter. I was so happy about it, the Underwood 5, because it could fit a piece of paper in horizontally as well as vertically, and it had a nice typeface, etc., etc. It worked really well. I was excited about it. They took all the typewriters in the house, and I could never quite figure out why. You know, until I read up on what happened more in the 1960s and 70s, got an idea that they were actually trying to match up the typeface on the typewriter and the ribbons, which you can see in these evidence bags here. You could figure out what was typed on that typewriter and ribbon, and then they were hoping to find a communique that was typed up by the ELF to match it to. But like I said, there were no typewriter ELF communiques that I ever saw, so that was a dead end for them. But nonetheless, they sent it all to forensics, and I'm sure they fingerprinted it and checked all the typefaces and went through the whole thing. And these typewriter ribbons were released in separate bags. Now, there were two agents that were particularly taking this case personally, I'll say. They were not friendly. They would give us personal threats, threaten my life, threaten life imprisonment many times. One of them was from the FBI. His name was Dan Fite. And the other one was from the ATF. And his name was John Comrie. John Comrie was known among the radical environmentalist and animal rights activists as the man who hunted down Rod Coronado. Rod Coronado, if you don't know, is a Native American former political prisoner who had freed a lot of animals with the Animal Liberation Front and was on the run for like 4 years. But they caught him, and John Comrie personally takes all credit for it. This guy is not a good person. I watch my mouth, but he is not a friend of mine. He personally threatened my life on a number of occasions when I wasn't even 20 years old. I was 19 years old. And like I said, he took this case very personally. He spent a lot of extra hours stalking and harassing and threatening us. John Comrie, for some odd reason, signed this typewriter as if he knew that this was my favorite thing that they took, that I always wanted back. And we got it back this morning at 5 a.m. and it says, it's got the date of the raid, item A2, Underwood 5 typewriter, John Comrie. I kind of got a kick out of that. So now I got his autograph. You'll notice that there's a merchandise table here, right? There's a bunch of Earth First material here, including a direct action manual. There's books that I've done, including one on the Earth Liberation Front. There's free ELF matchbooks, which feature Vail Ski Resort on fire, courtesy of the ELF. And there are these, in solidarity with the Earth Liberation Front, patches, which are only $4. So if anyone wants these, we're the only place to get them, and they're only $4 to get them now. Talk to the fine people here at Global Justice Ecology Project. This is what I came to show you. This is an early cell phone. We had organized this conference, an activist conference, in 1997, and we were foolish enough at that point to put our home phone number as the contact for anyone who's interested in coming to the conference. If you wanted to find a place to stay or you had questions about the conference, call us at home. Well, shortly afterwards, we started getting a lot of death threats. People who were targeted by the ELF and other people claiming to be part of the militia were calling and giving very detailed and sometimes very frightening death threats. So we had to get a new home phone, and we realized that we can't be using home phones to deal with press for the Earth Liberation Front anymore. So I got this. It's a Nokia cell phone. It was like 1998 probably when I bought this. And I did not know many people with cell phones back then, especially because most people I hung out with were like anarchist, environmentalists, like hippies that were not into it. But I had to have one because of the work I was doing. And it's been a long time since I've seen it. I tried to open it up today and see if there was a SIM card in it. They didn't have SIM cards back then, so I don't really know how they could. And anytime that people risk their freedom to fight for the freedom of all of us, I think that's an inspiring thing for me. That's a big deal for me. But this show is really just about getting you to question, like, what is criminal and what isn't. We're sending out faxes. We're exercising free speech. We're talking to news media. Maybe we're embarrassing the government, but this is supposed to be a free country, right? We're supposed to have the freedom of speech, freedom of association, the freedom of the press. We are printing and publishing stuff that is in support of the Earth Liberation Front. That's not a crime. Maybe the government thinks what the Earth Liberation Front has done is a crime, but I don't think so. I don't think that's a crime at all, and it's my right not to think that. So if they, are having trouble catching the ELF, that's their problem. I'm happy about that. If they can't find the ELF, they can't put anyone in prison, I'm happy about it. That does not give them the right to harass people who are exercising free speech. It does not give them the right to harass people who are simply, pointing out the fact that we are on some kind of path towards like ecological annihilation on this planet, and nobody's paying attention, nobody's doing anything about it. At the time, I felt very compelled to risk whatever I could risk to get people to think about what was going on in the environment, what was going on with animals, what was going on to people in third world countries, and all these other issues that I was so passionate about at the time. I was willing to risk my freedom for that. I was willing to stand up and say, you know what, I agree with these people you call criminal, and I think more people should be doing this. I think this type of thing should be happening every day, and I said that. I guess the government didn't like it. I guess it's one thing to say that to a group of 6 people in a private house, and it's another thing to say that on Rolling Stone and 60 Minutes and 2020 and all the other big news media outlets that we did that in. But that doesn't change the fact that it's free speech. You have a right to believe what you believe. You have a right to say what you want to say. And this government really doesn't care what you say and what you believe up until the point that it actually starts to threaten them. And apparently this was a threat, because I wasn't just saying things, there were people also doing things. And there was a movement that was causing hundreds of millions of dollars in damages and making people think about climate change, making people think about deforestation. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, all I want with this exhibit is for people to think about, is free speech, is this free speech, or is this terrorism, the T word, right? And to come to their own conclusions. And you can think what you want about the Earth Liberation Front, but the fact is, I think what I want about the Earth Liberation Front. I think what I want about the Underground Railroad. I think what I want about the Weather Underground. I think what I want about John Brown and Harriet Tubman and a whole lot of other people in this history of this country that have fought and risked their freedom so that we can all live in a place that's half decent. We've got a long way to go.